course. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Kristen Ward, and I'm tuning in from the States here. I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, and super excited to be on your show today.
Super excited to have you on. Actually, we were speaking in the beginning about, just the direction of how I'd love this conversation to unfold. And one of the most vital and important things in which I want you and I to discuss is please bring us into a time in your life, because I know that people see you now and they observe all the great things and the great pursuits that you're endeavoring into. But there's always a beginning for somebody, and there's always a discovery for somebody. And I'm sure that there may be people who are watching this who are also in the discovery phase and disposition of their leadership, of their purpose and significance. Please take us back to a time in your life when you discovered that you had something valuable and great to offer to the world.
Yeah, for sure. That's such a great question. And it's funny, it kind of makes me really think back. I think a lot of times you hear people say there's like this whole thing of like, are leaders born or can you create leaders or whatever the case may be? And I think if I could remember the earliest memories of like where leadership started to kind of like peek into my life or at least when I was aware of it, I would say probably around middle school. We used to go, I'm a twin and me and my sister used to go to like this after school program. Some people may know about it. It's very popular here in the United States, but it's called Girls Incorporated. And it was just like an after school program where kids who were like in middle school would go to, and things like that. And I remember we would be in some of like the little classes and doing some of the projects and some of the team things. And somehow I would always end up being the person who kind of was the leader of the team, right? And I think a lot of that had to do with like just being able to recognize other people's strengths and how, if we were on a team, we could really like, okay, how do we really strategize to do the best that we could do and show up the best that we could? And then the second thing that comes to mind for me, fast forward, I kind of get through like school and I go to college and all of that. And I remember maybe I would say within maybe a month or two of like the first real job that I had as an adult out of school, one of my managers pulled me into a meeting one day and she said, Kristen, I don't think you're aware of the influence that you have. And I said, what do you mean by that? She said, I don't know if you realize that when we're in meetings, if you give your opinion, you can sway the entire room to go in the direction that whatever it is that you're deciding or whatever you're sharing. And it was interesting because I think that a lot of times, this is where I think the responsibility of leadership comes in, is that when you realize and you're aware of the leadership abilities that you have to be responsible to steward them well. I think a lot of times we look at people who are leaders only in positive lights, but there are people who have led people in the wrong direction. But at the end of the day, it's still leadership. So I think for those of us who like understand, a call for leadership, knowing that, hey, this is a gifting that God is giving you, you have to become a good steward of that and say, now that I know that I have a certain level of influence or I have a certain level of leadership, what do I do with that? So anyway, long answer to a short question, but that's kind of like how I saw leadership start to evolve in my life in different areas and in different ways.
So it was you recognizing your influence, but recognizing your influence was enabled by somebody who was able to identify it in you, right? Somebody who was able to tell you that there's great leadership capacity and ability that you have. Please tell us a bit more about the people that you have in your life that are able to pinpoint just the substance that you bring to the table, and also highlight the importance of having those kind of people around as a leader.
Yeah, it's interesting. My mother is like a parenting, almost like a parenting coach. And I think for a lot of times, I think that with leadership or any other type of gifting, I think that parents have to be able to identify that in their children first. It's so important because I think that my parents, I think my mother, specifically kind of showed me how to think for myself, how to make sure that I was never having to really depend on like, being swayed by other people and things, and really looking at things and pulling out, what do you see here? What is your take on this? And it really gave me an opportunity to really, like I said, to think for myself. And with that, I think a lot of times you can really get clear on who you are and be able to really show up as who you are. So I think, one, starting with parents, I think it's so important that parents, that you look at your children and identify, because a lot of times people who are natural leaders, they're leaders when they're trained at a very young age. And I think as parents, it's important that you can really develop that and start to notice that in your child. The other thing is, I would say for people, because I think at different spaces of my life, there were always people who could really help give me language for the leadership ability that I had. And I think that probably as a child, I didn't take that as serious or pay that much attention to it. But if I can look back, I really do see where people kind of poured into me and said, I believe in certain parts of my career, I felt like managers and supervisors, they gave me a hard time, what I felt like at the time, but they were really trying to develop a skill set that, that I just naturally had. But yeah, I would say for anyone, who's kind of in that space, really listen to what people are telling you, right? Listen to what the compliments people give you, listen to the feedback that they give you, because a lot of times they're really giving you that. In most cases, when people have your best intention in mind, they really are doing that to help give, almost mirror to you, to show you, what it is that they see inside of you. So I know a lot of times when we're leaders, it's easy to become comfortable with yourself, right? Especially if you're not in a position where you're obviously leading people, but you can get so familiar with who you are. And I think that's the tricky part of leadership, where really recognizing, and here's the big thing, owning the fact that you have leadership ability and leadership gifting. Because when you've been with yourself all your life, you can easily overlook and just kind of dismiss the fact that you really do have a God-given gift to lead in whatever capacity that looks like. Coaching was something that I didn't even know was a thing when I started doing it. I think I was doing something that I really didn't know what I was doing at the time. So I was living here in Atlanta and had started to lead a women's group where we were like a Bible study group, a community group. And we were I'm teaching and just like sharing the word of God and just meeting so many women who had so much potential that they weren't operating in. And, they're just showing up to this Bible study and, we're having a great time. But I think what happens when a person starts to really figure out who they are in God, they start to have, I feel like this awakening where they start to desire purpose. They start to desire, what am I here for? What am I supposed to be doing? What does destiny look like for me? And that was happening for a lot of the women that were coming to the group. But it was kind of like, okay, what do I do with this? What do I do with these questions that I have? And what I started to do was really just walking with these women through the process of figuring out what they were called to do, also figuring out, what did that look like for them practically? What did that mean for them career-wise, right? What did that mean for them relationally and all the different aspects of their life? So I was actually sitting down with women and having these sessions and helping them navigate through the different courses of their life. Now, I want to mention this because this is important. Now, we fast forward 7-8 years. I'm a certified coach internationally, right? I've been through, went to one of the best coaching programs to get actually the education around coaching, along with the experience that I've had over the years. And a lot of people confuse coaching and mentoring and therapy. They kind of group all of these different kind of practices together. But one of the big differences around coaching that separates it from other practices, if you think about therapy, for example, therapy deals a lot with the past and how did you get to where you are today, right? Why are you where you are? Why do you feel the way that you feel? What experiences have shaped kind of your mentality, your perspective, so on and so forth. But when you think about coaching, coaching is about the future. How do I get to the future state? How do I get to the person I'm supposed to become? We're not dealing so much with the past. We're dealing with the future of where are you going? What do you really want out of your life, right? How do you get there? What's the accountability? What are the boundaries that you need in place to be able to be everything that you're called to be? So that's kind of like the coaching thing. I stumbled into it and I became so curious and found out that what I was doing was an actual thing. It was a whole institution of coaching. And then I started to get educated and learn formally and get certified. I started to work with an international coaching company and things like that, and really hone in on the skill of what I was doing. So I guess the short answer is I stumbled into coaching, didn't even know I was doing it, and then just really started to, sharpen and develop the craft of coaching itself. So that's how I got here.
When you think of the term and the concept leadership, and through my observation just of your journey in your life, you're a phenomenal coach. You've coached people who have built businesses. And another thing in which I've observed in your journey is just your spiritual covering. You're always in the presence of you're always in the house of the Lord. You're always allowing yourself. No, this is facts, you're always allowing yourself to be poured into. And
right.
That where do you get that spirit from? Because I believe it's a spirit. Being teachable has to move beyond being a discipline. Because I really think being teachable is a spirit. And I really think leadership globally and across the board could just encounter so much quantum leap if people develop the spirit of being teachable. And that's an observation I've made concerning you and your journey. Speak to us a little bit about that.
No, I appreciate that. I think that's a tremendous compliment. I think the more I've learned, the more I realize I don't know. And I think that's like an exciting thing and a humbling thing at the same time. And I think for me, one thing I've realized is that if I'm around a person, and I think you can learn something from anybody. You can learn something from a child if you're really tuned in and listening to God and say, God, what do you want me to get out of this? And he'll use anything. We see it all throughout the Bible, where God uses strange things to speak or communicate a message. And I really feel like, I think prayer, I used to pray things like, God, show me yourself, or reveal to me, this or that. And then I started to become open. I think when we start to ask questions, whether it's to God, whether it's to other people, then we have to be prepared for an answer. And I think to your point, in order to learn and truly be able to be a person who can receive, we have to be postured to do that. We have to be in a position to say, I don't know everything about this, but I want to know more. I have a hunger to be able to know more about this. I want to dig into this. I'm curious about this. One of the best things we can do is be curious about good things, because I think that God just does a great job of getting us the information we need for whatever season we're in our life, for getting the right people to us, for getting the right perspective in us. And I think a lot of that has to come with a place of humility for one, but then also like really being, the only way I can think to say it is being postured, right? Being in a place where, are you even in environments that you can really receive from? A lot of people say, Kristen, how do I know when it's time to leave something? How do I know when it's time to go somewhere else? My answer to them is always this: are you done receiving development from that place? If there's still something that you can be developed in while you're there, then it may not be necessarily the time to leave. But I think that's the thing. I think my passion for development and becoming the best version of who I can be, I think that drives a lot of everything around leadership. And I think a lot of times people think that leadership is about, being first and being seen and being, the person on the forefront. But a lot of times leadership looks like servanthood, right? It looks like serving. It looks like, there's a book called Leaders Eat Last. It means setting everyone else up for success. And then sometimes that means that you're the one who are kind of like a little bit on the last. But here's the thing about it. If you believe that God is capable of always taking care of you, then you can be confident enough in really pouring into other people. My belief is that I cannot outpour God. No matter how much I pour into people, no matter how much I give, I believe that God is always going to do more of that for me. And that, I think that's a beautiful thing in leadership, of like finding this balance of being able to pour, but also be able to receive at the same time so that you're never empty. That's the grace and that's the dance of leadership, of being able to pour out without being empty because you're always allowing God to pour into you.
Being able to pour out without being empty because you're always allowing for God to pour into you. And that's a posture.
Yeah.
That's a posture that you have to take and always have to make sure that you're postured there. I want you to please take us back into a time, because somebody may be watching this, and I'm sure there's people who would have known of you and your story and are watching this interview, and they see how excellently you perceive, how excellently you position yourself, how excellently your appearances, your way of speech, your articulation, leadership capacity, and just your results. But I know for sure, without a doubt, that every leader who reaches a great place of destiny has been through the fire, has been tried, has been tested, definitely has been tried, has been tested, has been proven, has been betrayed, has been lost, because that place of destiny, and I'm sure you can attest to this. I mean, I'm fairly young, but I've experienced quite a number of things. When you reach that place of destiny, it's like, man, it's like you yourself are in disbelief that you've reached it because of how much you've had to overcome and encounter to reach that place. Speak to us about, let this be a vulnerable moment for somebody who may be where you were, who is there right now currently and is watching. They currently in that moment of being tested, being proven, being tried. Take us into a vulnerable moment or season or seasons of your life where you felt like you were at your lowest. And how did you get out of that? Who lifted you up? How did you lift yourself up?
Right. So this is very interesting that you mentioned this. So we're in the third month of the year in 2023. So this year's for me has been moving very fast. I was talking to a friend the other day and I was saying this year, these 3 months, I feel like almost a year's worth of things have happened in just these 3 months for me, because that's how much has been just moving, right? But I would say probably for January, I went through so much testing just in this year. I'm not talking about something that was years ago, but I find this at different places of my life, because you're absolutely right. I don't think people understand how much by the time you see a person accomplish something publicly, you have no idea what they've gone through privately. So, there were certain things that I set up to do specifically in this year. And it was like coming into January, as soon as I put these things down on paper, as soon as I said, this is what I'm going to be doing, immediately I felt like I was attacked on every side, right? I mean, literally almost everything you can think of. And a lot of times when we're in those spaces, right, there may be people who are listening right now, and you're like, oh my gosh, that's where I am. The moment I decided that I was going to, go after God, the moment that you said you were going to start this business or you were going to build your team, whatever it is, it's like, as soon as you put that out there, you start to feel the attack, you start to feel the pushback, you start to feel, the restriction there. A lot of times it's a testing of our readiness for, are you really committed to, even if things aren't going how you want them to go, are you committed to beyond that, the thing, and saying, God, although I feel like I can't do this, right? This is where I was, we're talking about 6 weeks ago or so, where it's like, if I'm in this position where I've said I want to do this, but I literally feel like I cannot because of where I am, I trust that you can do what I cannot do for myself right now. Wow. That's a very tricky and hard place. And like I said, by the time you see anyone do something public, they've had to push through that friction of the moment to say, I'm not going to let this really stop me from doing and moving forward. There have been seasons of my life where I get into those moments and I back down and I haven't done the things that I said I was going to do, or I didn't move forward with what I really believed that God was showing me. But what I found is that I get absolutely nothing out of those moments. I get nothing from that. And I think I've just gotten to a place in my life where I'm like, you know what? if I believe that God is really showing me to do this, if I truly believe that this is what God has called me to and this is who I am at a place where I'm committing to that because I have tried backing out. I've tried shrinking back. I've tried watering myself down. I spent years just wanting to fit in and just not be a leader and not be all of these things, but I couldn't get away from it. So I figured at some point in wisdom, my best bet would be just to come into agreement with who God has really said that I am. So I just want people to know that if you feel like where you are, what you're experiencing, that stuff it is hard and it's true, but I'll say it this way, it's factual what you're experiencing, but that is not your truth. It may be facts that you're here, you're going through this, you feel this way, but it's not the truth about who you are. And I think a lot of times the enemy just wants us to, in those moments, come into agreement with the lies concerning that a situation may be trying to tell us, that a hard time may be trying to tell us. You can be at the end of your rope, but if you can figure out a way to say, I'm still coming into agreement. We think that you have to feel faith. You don't have to feel faith. A lot of times you're in faith and you won't feel it. It won't feel good. It's not going to feel empowering. It's not going to feel like you're doing something dynamic, but it's still faith. And I think to answer your question of how do I get out of these moments, I have to pull away from everything. I pull away from like social media. That's like the first thing I'll come away from. I'm like, all right, let me get away from that because there's too many suggestions there. And really being around people who know me. What do you do when you don't feel like yourself? You got to get around the people who know the truth about you and they don't see you any differently just because you're having a bad moment or you're having a bad situation or you're going through a bad season so that you can remember who you are. So anyway, I just say that to say it's so important who we're around, right? And if we can find a way to drop breadcrumbs of like, how do you get back into the presence of God when you don't feel God, right? What did you do the last time? Remembering your process of how did you get back to, out of a situation that may have been confusing for you. And I say this, anything that brings you back to yourself is a blessing. Sometimes we go through hard things, but it's that hard thing that brought you back to like, you know what? That's not even who I am. If you can get to that reckoning of back to who you are, you have to thank God for that situation and what it is. So anyway, I'll pause there, but I'm just, my heart, I get it for those of you who are listening and you're like wrestling with maybe the call over your life, you're wrestling with who you are. Just know that every great man and woman has been there. They've been there. So your best bet is to come into agreement with who you truly are in God. You have an identity here on earth, but you have an identity in heaven. It's best to come into agreement with that identity that God has shown you in the high places, so that even when you don't feel it here on earth, you can still say, no, I know who I am. I know what God showed me. And I'm just going to choose to believe that even if I don't feel it.
Oh, wow. What a phenomenal way to close the interview. I'm blessed. Yeah. I'm encouraged. I'm inspired. And I know definitely someone out there is as well. Any last words, just something short to close this out with?
Yeah, this is what I would say. If you're still here, if you're listening to this, if you're hearing my voice right now, the fact that you're still here, that means that there's more for you to do in the earth. So I pray for you today that you would be inspired, that you would be moved to move on whatever it is that God has been showing you. You are equipped, you are capable, and the fact that you're here means that you have everything that you need to do to move on it. Get around the right people, get into the right environments, keep listening to good things like this, and trust God more than you trust what you can do for yourself.